A very dangerous family of attacks that are misusing the openness of the internet is spoofing, is to work and to move with faked address. So spoofing is describes the faking of addresses. You remember in the internet there are many different addresses. Hardware address of a machine, the addresses that are used by the internet, the addresses that is used for domain name service, the addresses that are used for different applications. And spoofing is the idea to send message with a faked address, with a faked sender address. Usually this attack is done as a preparation for further attack. For example, to send an email from a family member. Then the people are very trustful and do something which they are forced to do by this email, and the email does not came from a family member, the email came from an attacker. So the usage is that the sending of data packets with such fake sender addresses is to cover up attacks or to gain access to a protected system under false identity. For example, working with a third party's target address, the idea behind is to obtain data intended for the third party. For example, with man-in-the-middle attacks and others. Let's start with considering IP address spoofing. That means spoofing the internet address. IP spoofing refers to the use of faked IP addresses for messages to third parties. So the attacker, posing as a trusted sender, generates and sends a data packet with a faked sender address to the victim. This does not work generally. So the limitation is that usually this IP spoofing works only with connectionless protocols, for example UDP and ICMP, where no response is expected. Because of course the response is sent to the faked address. So the attacker does not receive the response. The IP spoofing works when we have connection-oriented protocols. IP spoofing works only with connection-oriented protocols when access to an intermediate system is possible. So the reason is that also here the response packet can be intercepted by the attacker at this intermediate system because he cannot receive it on a direct way. Attack scenario looks like follows. The attacker conceals him herself. Attacker fakes his or her own address so that it looks as if it comes from somewhere else to perform an attack. For example, to apply a denial of service attack or a distributed denial of service attack, the attacker does not use its own address, he works with the address of the victim, so it cannot be determined who is the real attacker. To show this, Alice is a user of the bank. The IP addresses of the bank is 192.168.0.1. Alice, which has the IP address 192.IC6.13.1. And here the attacker with the IP address 192.168.113.2, so it's different from that of Alice, sends a mail to the bank misusing the IP address from Alice. So this is an attack, for example, denial of service attack. So when the attack is analyzed, the result shows that the attack should come from Alice. In reality, the attacker was naive, who misused the IP address from Alice. What are countermeasures against such IP address spoofing? One should set up a good filtering rules on the firewall. For example, blocking packets from an external network that come with an internal IP address. Because this is a typical sign that someone else from outside is misusing an internal address to. And this is also an idea of this IP spoofing. If the firewall is not, if the rule is not carefully inserted, the firewall treats internal packets in a different way than external packets. And in this way, the attacker, by faking by spoofing the IP address, by misusing an internal address, but coming from the outside to the firewall, tries to get the firewall to apply to look not so careful to the content. Then another countermeasure is that one should connection-oriented protocol use, because the connection-oriented protocols, for example, such as TCP, anticipate at the creation of the bidirectional connection. So generally, an attacker with a fake IP address cannot get a response, because TCP establishes a connection between the two communication partners. So the attacker can start to communicate, but then the reply is sent to the original address and not to the attacker's address. Another countermeasure is strong authentication. Use of secure authentication methods, for example, IPsec. IPsec is it's a protocol that prevents sender forgery. I said spoofing can be applied on different levels, and we spoke about using spoofing of IP address on the network level, but spoofing can also be applied on the application level. For example, in the context of DNS, the domain name service. DNS spoofing refers to faking an association between DNS name, that's a computer name, and an IP address. The idea of the domain name service is that we are able to work with textual names and not with this number names. So there is domain name service a possibility to connect, to associate an IP address with such a textual address. And exactly what the idea of the spoofing is to manipulate this association. So to place a false entry in the domain name service, which in the effect redirects legitimate DNS addresses to the IP address of the attacker. So the attack method is the following: to manipulate the domain name service cache, DNS cache. On the victim's computer, the idea of such caches is to remember the association of a textual name of an IP address, because to compute this is difficult and needs time. So in the cache, there is the association stored between the IP address and the corresponding DNS address. And now the attack method is a timing attack. The idea is a response is faked to the victim's DNS request. So when the victim tries to find out what is has the domain name, there's a domain name and wants to find out the IP address, it sends a request to the domain name server, and if the attacker is able to send the answer, the wrong answer, before the original answer from the legitimate DNS server reaches the cache, then the first response is stored. First response is considered. The implementation of this domain name server cache is first come, first serve. What are countermeasures? Countermeasures, one has to install updates for DNS server software. So with high liability of DNS spoofing due to many vulnerabilities in the domain name server software. This is very complex software. So from time to time new vulnerabilities were found, and with the update these vulnerabilities are closed. One should, as another countermeasure, use the DNSSEC. This is the secure version of the domain name service protocol. Here the mapping between IP and the DNS is certified by signatures. So the receiver can, the DNS client can see whether the response comes from the legitimate server, DNS server, or not. The verification of the digital certificate of the actual target server. So this means that the signature should be controlled. So the certificate should be issued for the domain name service name, and after establishing a connection to a certificate-based TLS SSL service, for example HTTPS, the validity of the digital certification for a given domain can be verified. Let's look an example. So we have here Alice, we have here our attacker, we have here again bank.com with the IP addresses I already mentioned. And here is the domain name service. And the domain name service is a connection, association between the textual name, bank.com, and an IP address. And the idea of that attack is to manipulate this, to change this old connection, association between the textual name and the IP address, which is exactly the right IP address of the bank server, to replace the right IP address by the IP address of the attacker. And then, in the consequence, all what is sent to the bank is sent not to the bank, but is sent to the attacker. So the attacker manipulates. Now let's discuss this stack. The attacker is able to manipulate this table, this DNS table. And now when Alice asked for the IP of bank.com, the table, there is a table lookup done, and she gets the answer, the wrong answer, that the entrance here is the IP address bank.com is associated with the IP address of the attacker. And then when Alice tries to connect to the bank, in reality, they are connected to the attacker. And then, for example, the attacker can present her a login page, and she is assuming, Alice assuming she is connected to the bank, gives in her username, gives in her password, and then the attacker has both. Sorry. The third example I want to give is email spoofing. It's also possible to send emails. It's very simple in a way to send emails with a faked sender address. The use of the bogus address when sending spam and phishing emails, the idea in both cases is to gain users' trust. So emails frequently obtain malicious software, for example, as an attachment. And the email says, open this, and then you get something, or you win something, or you can see something. And when, in the moment, the user is opening this attachment, then the malicious software is loaded and executed. You remember we discussed this already. Of course, if this email comes from an unknown address, the user are much more critical than if such an email comes from a trusted person. So the basic problem is the identity of the sender is typically not checked by an email server. So it's very simple to fake the email address and then to send the email with a faked address. The email recipient has no way to verify the sender address later. If it's not done by the email server, then it's impossible to do it later. Such a concrete attack method for email spoofing can look as following. The idea of the attacker is to change the displayed sender. Email protocols, this is SMTP protocol, allows that beside of the sender address also a displayed name is shown. So for example, that if the sender address is a quite complicated email address, in the display only the name can be shown of the sender. So the display name then is chosen as a trusted name. For example, OpenHPI is displayed, but in reality the attacker is behind the attacker address attacker@domain.com. So correct email addresses is not displayed in every email program, but we have to say that the more recent email programs, they are checking the actual sender in the email program. It becomes more common, so that typically both names are shown. There is another attack method, the attack method of sending emails via open email servers or open relay servers. The email server, such a type of email servers, they accept to send emails with each sender address without verifying the sender account. So this is misused, for example, for sending spam mails or phishing mails. And it's simply a false server configuration, but such type of servers offer this service. Such servers are, however, relatively quickly detected and then blocked by email providers. It's so-called blacklisting. Another quite successful attack method for email spoofing is using very similar looking domain names. A malicious sender registers an email domain that looks similar to a trustworthy domain. For example, uni-potsdam instead of uni-potsdam. So on the first view, it looks very similar, and you need to look very careful to detect that it is a difference. But this is the domain name of the University Potsdam, and this is a domain name of a cyber criminal person. What are countermeasures to prevent email spoofing? First countermeasure is to sign emails. This is only a legitimate sender is able, by means of his private key, to generate a signature in such a way that it can be recognized that this email really comes from that person. Next week we will speak about such signature procedures and about encryption. Another countermeasure is generally not trusting messages from unknown sources, especially when they prompt you and when they prompting you to do something, for example, to open an email, to open a file, or to enter user data. Then you should be very, very careful not to trust. You see, the weakness of the internet protocols, of various internet protocols, to the missing authentication makes it possible that attackers can act and can run a number of attacks by using a wrong sender address. It can be done with services like DNS, it can be done with the internet protocols, it can be done with email. So here you need to know this danger, and you have to carefully apply the proposed countermeasures.